Margaret of Valois, commonly known as Marguerite de Valois or affectionately referred to as Queen Margot, was a complicated figure in French history. Daughter of the indomitable Catherine de Medici and Henry II of France, she was born into a world of power, intrigue, and religious wars. Not only would this shape her into the queen she would become, but as an intelligent and self-aware woman who didn't fit the morals of her day, Margaret would have a difficult and tragic life. She was born on May 14, 1553, at Château de Saint-Germain-en-Laye near Paris. As the youngest daughter of King Henry II and Catherine de Medici, she entered the world amidst the burgeoning turmoil of the French Wars of Religion, an era of brutal conflict and religious division between the Catholic majority and the Protestant minority of France, who were known as Huguenots. Her birth coincided with France's descent into religious and political upheaval, inevitably shaping her personality and upbringing. Margaret's childhood was marked not only by the opulence expected of a royal princess, but also by emotional complexity. Her father died tragically in a jousting accident in 1559 when Margaret was just 6 years old, plunging the royal family and the French court into instability. Her mother, Catherine de Medici, a formidable and politically astute queen dowager in her own right, quickly assumed a central role as regent, no doubt strongly influencing Margaret. From an early age, Margaret observed her mother's political maneuvering, cultivating an awareness and adaptability that would later serve her well in navigating the complex realities of French court politics. Catherine de Medici took a keen interest in Margaret's education, ensuring that she received one of the most thorough and humanist educations available to any princess of the era. Margaret was instructed in classical literature, philosophy, poetry, rhetoric, theology, and languages, mastering Latin, Greek, Italian, and Spanish alongside her native French. Her mother's court was renowned for its patronage of Renaissance arts and humanist scholarship, and Margaret flourished in this intellectually stimulating environment, becoming known as the Pearl of Valois. Catherine's emphasis on cultivating a politically literate and culturally refined daughter reflected not just maternal pride, but also strategic foresight. Margaret, as a princess of royal blood, was expected to play a central diplomatic and political role through marriage alliances and courtly diplomacy. Margaret's youth was defined by her deep bond with her siblings, especially her brother Henry, later King Henry III of France. From their early teenage years, Margaret and Henry shared an unusually close and affectionate relationship built upon mutual trust and loyalty, a rarity in the often fraught relationships between royal siblings. This trust, however, was not without complications. The environment of the French royal court, rife with suspicion and intrigue, soon affected their relationship. In her late teens, Margaret's growing popularity, intelligence, and beauty made her the focal point of numerous court intrigues and political maneuvers. Chief among these was her close association with the powerful Guise family, ardent Catholic champions at court, whose charismatic young leader Henry, Duke of Guise, was among the most influential and controversial figures of his generation. Rumours began to circulate regarding Margaret's possible romantic involvement with Henry of Guise, whose family represented a powerful political faction openly opposed to Protestant interests. Such gossip deeply unsettled Margaret's brother Henry, particularly as he returned from Poland, where he had briefly served as king, to inherit the French throne in 1574. Henry viewed any association between his sister and the ambitious Guise family as both politically dangerous and personally troubling. The suspicion that Margaret had romantically aligned herself with Henry of Guise severely strained her previously strong relationship with both her brother and their mother. For Catherine de Medici, whose overarching political ambition was stability through carefully orchestrated marriage alliances and neutrality between factions, Margaret's rumoured attachment represented a serious threat to her diplomatic strategy. Catherine perceived this alleged romance not only as inappropriate but potentially disastrous, jeopardizing carefully maintained balances at court and undermining her efforts to negotiate peace between Catholics and Protestants. Consequently, Catherine and Henry III grew increasingly wary and distrustful of Margaret. They began actively distancing themselves from her, isolating her politically and socially at court. This suspicion and estrangement deeply wounded Margaret, fostering in her a sense of isolation that would profoundly shape her later behaviour and outlook. Margaret's life underwent a profound transformation in 1572 when her mother orchestrated her marriage to Henry of Navarre, leader of the Huguenots and future King Henry IV of France. At its core, the union was conceived as a political alliance aimed at reconciling France's violently divided religious factions. Catherine, struggling to manage the volatile tensions between Catholics and Protestants, viewed Margaret's marriage to Henry, an influential Protestant prince, as a pragmatic, though controversial, gesture towards peace. However, the marriage faced significant obstacles from its inception, most notably fierce opposition from Pope Gregory XIII. The Pope, firmly opposed to any union that risked legitimizing Protestant influence in a major Catholic nation, refused to grant a dispensation for the wedding ceremony. This refusal complicated the situation severely, amplifying the tensions surrounding the event. Consequently, a highly unusual compromise had to be devised to accommodate the Pope's refusal. On August 18, 1572, the wedding ceremony took place at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. In a service that deliberately underscored religious divisions rather than unity, Margaret, dressed splendidly in royal robes, was present within the cathedral, accompanied by her Catholic relatives and French nobility. Henry of Navarre, however, was barred from entering due to his Protestant faith and had to remain outside on the cathedral steps throughout the entire Catholic Mass, symbolically underscoring the division that the marriage was supposed to bridge. Instead of Henry himself, Margaret's brother Francois, Duke of Anjou, stood in as a proxy for Henry during the religious rites conducted inside. This symbolic substitution only intensified the awkwardness and tension of the ceremony, vividly highlighting France's entrenched religious divides rather than healing them. The ceremony thus became not just a marriage, but a political spectacle, carefully staged but starkly illustrating the depth of the country's sectarian tensions. Adding another layer to the historical narrative is an anecdote invented decades later by François Eudes de Mézeray, a 17th century historian. Mézeray described a dramatic and widely circulated scene in which Margaret was supposedly forced into consenting to her marriage by her brother, King Charles IX, who allegedly pushed down her head to simulate a nod of assent. For centuries, this evocative anecdote was cited to illustrate Margaret's victimization and the coercion surrounding her marriage. Modern scholarship, however, has definitively established that this anecdote was fabricated. Historians now recognize it as propaganda manufactured years after the event, strategically employed during later negotiations to annul Margaret and Henry's marriage, thereby casting doubt on its legitimacy from its outset. Despite these awkward and politically charged beginnings, Margaret initially approached the marriage happily, recognizing its potential value for stabilizing France. Unfortunately, the intended reconciliation was swiftly and violently undermined. Within days, the wedding celebrations were brutally overshadowed by one of the most horrific events in French history, the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. On August 24, 1572, violence erupted across Paris and quickly spread to the provinces. Instigated primarily by ultra-Catholic factions at court who feared Protestant influence, thousands of Huguenots were brutally slaughtered. This sudden, catastrophic violence profoundly shocked Margaret, who found herself trapped in the heart of the bloodshed at the royal court. Amidst the chaos, Margaret acted decisively and courageously, risking her own life to shelter several Protestant nobles, including her husband Henry, protecting them from almost certain death. This dramatic and traumatic event demonstrated her remarkable bravery and presence of mind in crisis, traits that became hallmarks of her political and personal character in the years ahead. Further complicating Margaret's personal circumstances, the massacre drastically altered her marriage's political context. What had been intended as an alliance for peace became instead a bitter symbol of division. Her husband, Henry, found himself effectively a hostage at the Catholic-dominated court for several years, a period of acute tension during which Margaret continuously navigated the intricate politics of her family and her husband's precarious situation. The early months of Margaret's marriage were immediately fraught. Shortly after the trauma of the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in 1572, Margaret was thrust into another political crisis when a group known as the Malcontents, disillusioned French nobles opposed to the monarchy's centralizing policies, attempted a coup in 1574. Charles IX was deteriorating, but his brother Henry had just been elected as King of Poland, and this allowed some to see it as a way to get power. The malcontents' intention was to prevent Margaret's brother Henry becoming King of France, and instead elevate her younger brother Francois, Duke of Alençon, to the throne. Due to her affection for her older brothers Charles IX and Henry, then newly crowned King of Poland, she at first publicly denounced the conspiracy in which her husband, Henry of Navarre, was deeply implicated. However, in April the entire coup was exposed, many of those involved were executed, and Henry of Navarre and Francois were both held at the Château de Vincennes until the accession of Henry III of France. He allowed them both to be allowed free, albeit under surveillance, but he never forgave his sister. Yet despite this early show of support for her husband, Margaret and Henry struggled significantly to build a genuine marital relationship. The expectation to produce an heir, essential to solidifying Henry's political legitimacy, placed considerable stress on the couple. Their inability to conceive a child, despite years of marriage, exacerbated underlying tensions, fueling mutual resentment and disappointment. The lack of an heir complicated Henry's political ambitions and intensified the scrutiny Margaret faced at court, where fertility was seen as an essential measure of a queen's worth. The marriage soon grew even more strained when Henry openly took Charlotte de Sauve, a famously captivating figure at court and a member of Catherine de Medici's flying squadron, a ring of female spies for the Queen Mother, as his lover. Charlotte de Sauve became a significant source of discord within Margaret's family. Notoriously skilled at manipulating political intrigue, Charlotte deliberately incited rivalry and suspicion between Henry and Francois, Duke of Alençon, who was also her lover, effectively sabotaging Margaret's careful efforts to forge political unity between her husband and her closest brother. This betrayal deeply undermined Margaret's political position and increased tensions within the already fragile family dynamics. In response to these humiliations and political setbacks, Margaret herself began to seek comfort and strategic advantage elsewhere. It was widely rumoured, and likely accurate, that Margaret became romantically involved with Louis de Clermont, Lord of Bussy d'Amboise, one of the era's most celebrated noblemen. Bussy was charismatic, influential, and deeply aligned with Francois, Duke of Alençon. This liaison served as a personal refuge for Margaret, but also strategically reinforced her political connections with her brother Francois, who was increasingly becoming her most trusted ally at court. Margaret's political ambitions were further evident in 1577 when she proactively sought permission to undertake a diplomatic mission to Flanders on behalf of Francois, who harboured ambitions to become sovereign in the southern Netherlands. Margaret's request demonstrated her exceptional diplomatic skills and determination to carve out her own political identity. Over the course of 2 months, Margaret travelled from Paris to Flanders, meeting with influential men who were hostile to Spain and open to joining her brother Francois. Despite the contacts she made, the Duke of Anjou was ultimately unsuccessful in defeating the Spanish. But the event showcased Margaret's boldness and her deep commitment to her brother's political interests. However, it also widened the gap between her husband and brother, tension building until Anjou asked to leave court. Henry took this as proof of a conspiracy against him and had Francois imprisoned, and the Duke of Anjou was only able to escape due to Margaret throwing a rope down from her window, according to her own memoirs, which were probably partly true and partly dramatised. As Margaret and Henry continued their precarious political balancing act, scandals mounted on both sides, particularly at their court in Nérac, Navarre, in the late 1570s and early 1580s. Margaret notoriously fell deeply in love with Jacques de Harlay, Lord of Champvallon, a sophisticated nobleman whose relationship with Margaret became an open secret. Henry, meanwhile, intensified their mutual antagonism by openly flaunting his affair with Françoise de Montmorency-Fosseux, scandalously impregnating the young noblewoman who was just 14 at the time. Montmorency-Fosseux refused to leave court, apparently openly screaming at Margaret and clearly sure of her prospects of replacing the Queen of Navarre. Instead, the young girl gave birth to a stillborn daughter not long after, and the affair faded. However, the atmosphere at court, saturated with infidelity, jealousy, and political scheming, rapidly degenerated, eroding the couple's remaining goodwill and respect. In 1582, Margaret returned to Paris, seeking relief from the scandal-ridden environment of Nérac, only to encounter further difficulties. Back at the French court, her already strained relationship with her brother Henry III worsened, primarily due to her involvement in factional politics and her growing reputation for scandalous personal behavior. Her political autonomy, combined with her romantic entanglements, deeply irritated the king and her mother Catherine, causing further estrangement from her family. Margaret's health deteriorated in early 1583, and rumours swirled throughout Parisian court circles that she had become pregnant with Champvallon's child, a scandalous accusation that further damaged her reputation and complicated her precarious position at court. Although historians now believe these pregnancy rumours to have been unfounded, the scandal highlighted Margaret's increasing vulnerability and isolation at court. Returning reluctantly to Navarre in 1584, Margaret encountered yet another devastating personal blow: the unexpected death of her beloved younger brother Francois, Duke of Anjou, who had long been her staunchest political ally and protector. Francois's death left Margaret politically isolated and emotionally bereft, robbing her of her strongest supporter and confidant. Compounding Margaret's misfortunes, Henry of Navarre took yet another influential mistress, Diane d'Anjou, known as La Belle Corisande. Diane aggressively promoted herself as Margaret's replacement, even becoming Henry's business partner for around 8 years, hoping that Henry would repudiate Margaret altogether and make her queen. Diane's ambitions heightened tensions at the Navarrese court, threatening Margaret's already precarious status and further exacerbating the deep animosity between Margaret and Henry. The effect of these betrayals, losses, and relentless court scandals ultimately proved too much to sustain. By 1585, Margaret's marriage to Henry had declined irreparably, their relationship fractured beyond repair by personal animosities, political rivalries, and the corrosive effects of repeated humiliations and betrayals. Later that year, recognizing the impossibility of any meaningful reconciliation, Margaret took an extraordinary and unprecedented step for a queen of the 16th century. She openly abandoned her husband. By severing ties with her husband, Margaret made a bold bid for autonomy, defiantly asserting her political independence. Her boldness did not end with mere separation. Determined to carve out a new political identity, Margaret aligned herself with the Catholic League, a fiercely oppositional faction of Catholics adamantly opposed to the policies pursued by her husband and her own royal family. Her decision to align with such a controversial faction was a calculated risk, leveraging religious tensions for political gain. Margaret's alignment with the League dramatically positioned her against both her husband and brother Henry III, symbolically marking her political estrangement from her family. To consolidate her newfound position, Margaret orchestrated a daring coup d'état, seizing control of Agen, a strategic city within her appanage in southwestern France. This was an audacious operation, during which Margaret swiftly fortified the city, consolidating her hold by recruiting troops and directing military campaigns to extend her influence into the surrounding regions. Margaret's decisive action at Agen was a testament to her resourcefulness, bravery, and ambition, yet it ultimately proved unstable. The Agenais, weary of the heavy demands Margaret imposed upon them, soon revolted against her authority and negotiated with representatives loyal to Henry III. With royal troops swiftly approaching, Margaret was compelled to flee Anjou under humiliating circumstances. Rejecting urgent pleas from her mother, Catherine de' Medici, to retreat to the safety of a royal manor, Margaret instead chose a path of bold defiance. She withdrew to the formidable, nearly impregnable fortress of Carla, high in the Auvergne region. Here, Margaret installed herself alongside Jean de la de Galard, Seigneur d'Aubiac, a nobleman widely rumoured to be her lover. Demonstrating her steadfast loyalty and trust, Margaret appointed d'Aubiac captain of her personal guards, underscoring both their intimacy and her determination to assert her political independence, even at significant risk. Margaret's presence at Carla was an overt challenge to royal authority, highlighting her willingness to resist family pressures openly. Despite the fortress's strategic strength, however, Carla eventually became an untenable position as royal forces began advancing on her position. In 1586, facing imminent capture by the king's troops, Margaret retreated yet again, this time to the castle of Ibois, situated just north of Auvergne. This retreat represented yet another desperate attempt to maintain autonomy, albeit increasingly fragile. At Ibois, Margaret's position rapidly deteriorated further. Royal forces quickly laid siege to the castle, circling her completely. After nearly a month under siege, Margaret had little choice but to surrender. Her resistance had finally failed, and Margaret now found herself entirely at her family's mercy, acutely aware of her vulnerability and uncertain fate. On October 13, 1586, Margaret's brother, King Henry III, ordered her imprisonment within the isolated fortress of Ussel, deep in Auvergne. Her captivity in Ussel marked a harsh punitive measure, intended to neutralize her politically. Far more devastating was the fate of her trusted companion, d'Aubiac, whose execution Henry III commanded to be carried out in front of Catherine. This wasn't just a capital punishment, it was a threat to his sister. Catherine, who still felt maternal compassion despite political strain, pleaded unsuccessfully with her son for d'Aubiac's life. But Henry was unmoved, and Margaret was forced to witness d'Aubiac's brutal execution. The rumours that had persistently haunted Margaret's reputation now reached a fever pitch. Whispered gossip throughout the court and across France suggested Margaret was pregnant with d'Aubiac's child, a scandalous and politically damaging accusation that significantly worsened her already dire position. In her desperation and fear, Margaret fully expected her own execution was imminent. With characteristic dignity and defiance, she composed a poignant farewell letter to her mother Catherine. In this, Margaret solemnly requested that following her anticipated execution, a post-mortem examination be carried out to definitively prove that she was not in fact pregnant. Yet against all odds, Margaret survived this darkest hour. Ussel, initially intended as her prison, gradually became Margaret's sanctuary. Following the assassination of Henry III in 1589, and amidst the broader chaos enveloping France during the Wars of Religion, Margaret's imprisonment transitioned into a period of relative freedom and self-determination. She began reshaping Ussel from a fortress of isolation into a vibrant hub of intellectual and cultural exchange, attracting artists, poets, philosophers, musicians and writers from across France and Europe. During this decade-long residence in Ussel, Margaret rediscovered her sense of identity and purpose. She embraced literature and scholarly pursuits, ultimately authoring her memoirs, a pioneering literary achievement and one of the earliest examples of a woman crafting her narrative in European history. These memoirs, filled with vivid and candid portrayals of court life, political intrigue, and personal reflection, provided historians with invaluable first-hand accounts of a tumultuous era. In 1593, Margaret faced a pivotal turning point in her relationship with her estranged husband, now King Henry IV of France. By this time, their long marriage, marked by profound estrangement, public scandals, and political tensions, had become untenable, particularly due to Margaret's inability to bear children. Recognizing the political necessity of a legitimate heir to stabilize his reign, Henry IV first requested an annulment of their marriage. This marked a difficult yet crucial moment for Margaret. Margaret, understanding the dynastic realities and aware of her infertility, acknowledged that supporting her husband's political needs required her consent. Despite their troubled past, Margaret viewed her agreement to annul their marriage as an unusual but necessary gesture of reconciliation, demonstrating both political wisdom and maturity. Though this marked the formal dissolution of their union, Margaret was determined to ensure the arrangement upheld her dignity, status, and financial security. She negotiated insistently, demanding substantial financial settlements and assurances that she could retain her royal title of Queen. Yet, the terms of the annulment negotiations brought significant emotional tension, notably because Henry intended initially to marry Gabrielle d'Estrées, his long-standing mistress, with whom he already had a recognized son. Margaret, deeply opposed to Gabrielle's elevation, firmly resisted this plan. Gabrielle's sudden death in 1599 removed this obstacle, paving the way for Henry's marriage to Marie de Medici, an Italian princess whose status and legitimacy Margaret considered more acceptable. Pope Clement VIII pronounced the annulment bull in late 1599, officially dissolving their marriage and permitting Henry's remarriage the following year. After the annulment, Margaret's relationship with Henry improved considerably. No longer entangled in a fraught marriage, the pair found themselves able to develop a mutually beneficial and amicable political alliance. Margaret returned to Paris in 1605, now secure in her financial independence and royal status, and her former husband welcomed her warmly. Margaret's loyalty and shrewdness were dramatically highlighted when she uncovered the conspiracies of her nephew, Charles de Valois, the Count of Auvergne, an illegitimate son of Charles IX, who was plotting against Henry IV. Upon discovering these schemes, Margaret immediately informed her former husband, thwarting Auvergne's dangerous intrigues and securing Henry's gratitude. Further demonstrating her independence and political assertiveness, Margaret initiated legal proceedings against the Count of Auvergne in 1606 regarding a property inheritance. She achieved a significant personal and political victory when she won, thereby securing her full maternal inheritance. This inheritance was substantial, reflecting both Margaret's rightful claims and her determined persistence. Recognizing the implications of her newfound financial independence, Margaret decided to name her former husband's heir, the Dauphin Louis, the future Louis XIII, as her own heir. This act was politically astute and symbolically powerful, officially marking the dynastic transition from her own Valois lineage, of which Margaret was the final legitimate descendant, to the recently established Bourbon dynasty, now seated on the French throne. In Paris, Margaret's public image underwent a striking rehabilitation. She was no longer perceived merely as the scandal-ridden former queen, rather, she regained widespread respect as a dignified, generous, and intellectually sophisticated figure. Actively engaging in charitable causes, Margaret extended considerable financial support to religious institutions, educational foundations, and humanitarian projects. She established herself as an influential patron of the arts and culture, fostering intellectual exchanges and supporting writers, artists, and musicians. Her Parisian residence quickly evolved into a vibrant cultural salon, renowned for its sophistication and open-mindedness, significantly restoring her stature within society. Despite earlier difficulties associated with her annulment, Margaret fostered a genuine and cordial friendship with Henry IV's new queen, Marie de Medici. This unlikely friendship indicated Margaret's maturity and her genuine interest in France's political stability, transcending past personal grievances. Margaret's goodwill toward Marie culminated symbolically in 1610 when she attended Marie's coronation at the Basilica of Saint-Denis, an important gesture of unity and reconciliation within the royal family. Tragically, however, just one day following this coronation, Henry IV was assassinated by François Ravaillac, plunging France into uncertainty and grief. Margaret's personal reaction to this loss was marked by genuine sorrow, underscoring the complex emotions she must have felt for her former husband. In the final years of her life, Margaret became notably reflective and spiritual. Her generosity extended to charitable endeavors and religious patronage, funding numerous religious institutions, convents, hospitals, and initiatives supporting the poor. In 1614, Margaret publicly entered the intellectual debate known as the Querelle des Femmes, or the woman question. Responding passionately and eloquently to the misogynistic text The Flowers of Moral Secrets, authored by the Jesuit Father Loriot, she defended women's intellectual and moral capabilities, affirming her enduring commitment to women's dignity and equality. It's not surprising Margaret, who had long fought for her financial and political independence, emotional autonomy, and was unashamedly her own person, would also maintain a lifelong advocacy for women's intellectual independence and self-determination. Margaret of Valois died on the 27th of March, 1615 in Paris, at the age of 61. Her passing prompted widespread mourning, reflecting the remarkable rehabilitation of her public image and the respect she had earned through her later charitable and cultural patronage. Honoured with a dignified funeral, she was interred at the prestigious Basilica of Saint-Denis, the traditional burial site of French royalty, to mark her own regal lineage. Her death marked the poignant end of an extraordinary and tumultuous life. Margaret of Valois remains one of the most compelling figures in French history, her life vividly encapsulating the personal and political turmoil of late Renaissance France, as well as her own unique personality and ambition. Beyond her central role during the French Wars of Religion and the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, Margaret emerged as a shrewd political mediator who adeptly navigated the restrictive patriarchal structures of her time, demonstrating resilience and intellectual vitality despite personal tragedy and public scandal. Today, Margaret is particularly celebrated as a pioneering literary figure. Her memoirs, one of Europe's earliest autobiographies by a woman, offer vivid first-hand insights into political intrigue, courtly life, and personal relationships, providing historians invaluable access to a woman's authentic voice in a male-dominated era. Her later years saw significant rehabilitation of her public image through cultural patronage, charitable works, and strategic political actions, most notably naming the Dauphin Louis her heir, symbolically transitioning legitimacy from the Valois to the Bourbon dynasty. Margaret's lasting legacy extends far beyond her substantial influence on French literary and cultural traditions. As a royal woman whose intelligence, resilience, and political acumen defied the restrictive conventions of her time, she fundamentally shaped the politics, dynastic alliances, and personal relationships at the heart of late Renaissance France. Margaret's courage in navigating complex family loyalties and fierce religious divisions transformed her from a figure constrained by circumstance into one whose choices actively redefined the political landscape. Today, her life serves as a powerful reminder that strength and autonomy can flourish even in periods of profound adversity, and her story continues to inspire reflection on the resilience and potential inherent in every woman, regardless of the constraints imposed by history. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss any new documentaries.